Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Liam. Join us for a conversation about the transformative power of community. Together we talk about an evolutionary perspective on non-monogamy, what happens when you see your therapist at a dungeon, and the ethics of privacy versus transparency in non-monogamy. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Dr. Nicole. I'm a sex and relationship psychotherapist providing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, author of the Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, and founder of The Pleasure Practice, where I support people in crafting pleasurable sex lives and non-monogamous relationships. Dear listener, ooh, this is a good episode. I love getting to nerd out on the power of queer, BDSM, and non-monogamous communities because we have a lot of wisdom. We have a lot of wisdom about what it means to build community. We have a lot of wisdom around consent, and we have a lot of political activism energy that I am so passionate about being in collaboration with the guests on the show, the people that are in my programs that are doing the work with me in my 16-week programs. Y'all are some of the most amazing pleasure activists I have ever met that inspire me so much so, and it is such a joy truly to do this work. And it's important to remember that homosexuality was in the DSM, y'all. If you are not familiar with the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychological Disorders. This is what the field of psychology and psychiatry uses, and it was not that long ago that homosexuality was in there. And so I know all of you know to challenge these systems, but just a reminder, even the mental health care systems, if there's any question in your mind about what needs to be challenged, it's that too. It is that too. I know some of you are probably like, yeah, duh, Nicole, like we know those systems are also fucked up. But like, I'm just putting it out here again to remember that, yeah, very recently homosexuality was in there. And it is so important that we continue to challenge these systems and really step out into these conversations in vulnerable and visible ways, because these are the conversations that we all need to have, building skills truly in terms of language of how to talk about our sexual pleasure. And it is such a joy to be in this space and making these episodes for you, dear listener, each week. So thank you for joining me here, and thank you for sharing all of this educational wisdom with your community, your lovers, and your friends. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and free resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon members. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. And with that, dear listener, please know that I'm sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. Dear listener, there's a space already waiting for you where you are invited to let go of every old script about sex and relationships and begin living a life rooted in your pleasure, empowerment, and deep alignment. I'm Dr. Nicole, and this is your invitation to the Pleasure Liberation Groups, a transformative, educational, and deeply immersive experience designed for visionary individuals like you. Together, we'll gather in community to explore desire, expand relational wisdom, and embody the lives we're here to lead. Each session is woven with practices, teachings, and the kind of connection that makes real transformation possible. And I'll be right there with you, guiding the process with an embodied curriculum that supports both personal and collective liberation. This is your invitation into the next chapter of your erotic evolution. Say yes to your pleasure and visit modernanarchypodcast.com/pleasure practice to apply. And the first question that I like to ask each guest on the show is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
I would just say I'm Liam. And in terms of like the additional fluff in terms of like who I am and wherever, yeah, I think that generally comes naturally. But for the purpose of the introduction, I'm Liam. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology in the UK at the University of Brighton. And I'm an academic who focuses on sex research in general, specializing in BDSM, kink, and digital technologies.
Amazing. You're in the right place, for sure. And it was also really exciting. You were a nomination from a relationship anarchist that I had on the show who had recommended that I reach out to you. So I love these moments where it's community referrals through referrals through referrals. That was how I started the show, truly, as each guest who came on nominated who I went to next. And so I've been following that thread for 5 years.
And I think that's kind of so important because it feels like you're speaking to a community of people who are like-minded and have similar views.
Mm-hmm.
It creates that kind of nice conversational experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for saying yes and coming on to the show today.
You're very welcome.
Well, one of the first places I love to start every episode is taking a moment to really dive into your personal connection to this topic. And so I'd be curious for you, how did you become passionate about sexuality and BDSM and the online spaces? What lit that fire for your passion?
It was kind of during my adolescence, growing up as a sexual minority in a world where the internet was really just starting to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had my first computer at like 13, 14, I think. And it was one of those huge ones that took up a big space in the room. It was the computer room or computer area.
Uh-huh.
So I was kind of experiencing my adolescence and the key formative years alongside changing digital technologies. So when I was sort of 15, 16, 17, experiencing my sexuality as a sexual minority and navigating the world and realizing, oh, I don't fit in, and the information I'm getting given is for presumed heterosexuality. Like
Yeah.
we still exist in a heteronormative world on that assumption. So I had this kind of personal connection to always wanting to find out more about myself and about sex in general. Fast forward, I I did a psychology degree. Towards the end of my degree, there were opportunities to explore topics related to sex and sexuality from an evolutionary psych perspective.
Fascinating.
And one of the things I argued was the benefits of consensual non-monogamy from an evolutionary perspective.
I
And
love
it's just
that.
so counter to evolutionary psychology. And my person who marked my essay was just like, I struggled to agree with this, but you're not wrong. Like it doesn't, you're arguing good points. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, I've got knowledge and insights on this.
Can we pause there? I totally want to talk about that for sure. Because, as someone with ovaries, you would think, right, that if I had a bunch of different sperm, the best sperm would win out, right? Evolutionarily, I should want lots of different sperm inside me. The strongest one is going to make it to the ovary. And of course, the ovary also, or make it to the egg, right? And the egg also moves and envelops the sperm, so we don't have to tell that whole like patriarchal bullshit about like the sperm being the only thing that moves and the egg just sits back.
Mm.
For the listener who doesn't know about
Mm.
that, right? Like that's an important reframing of the science, which is also maybe an important point to talk about, is that the science, it's there, but we're always learning more, and we always have narratives to it, right? And so for a long time, dear listener, if you were not aware of this, the lingo around this was that the egg is docile and just sits back, and the manly sperm goes all the way through and makes it and penetrates and is so strong, and the egg is just sitting back and docile. And more contemporary science has realized that's actually not the case, right? The egg plays an
Yeah.
essential point of really moving towards sending all of the hormones and then enveloping the sperm, right? And so moments like that where we have to be conscious of the science was really lacking in the narratives. And so I think evolutionary theory is another huge one where they were like, oh, survival of the fittest, you want this mate, you want to pass down your lineage, you're going to pick one, blah, blah,
Mhm.
blah. But from a genetics perspective, wouldn't we think, like, again, more sperm means I'm going to get the best sperm? And also, if any of those people think that it's their child, now I have multiple potentially willing to take care of me because we can't determine the paternity. So now I've got this group of sperm donors who are willing to take care of me because they can't tell.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, so tell me your work. I'm curious.
Well, with that, like, and this is from like an undergraduate psych student who
Sure,
was
yeah.
trying to kind of piece things together that weren't meant to be pieced together.
On a
I
good
think
path.
some of my I think some of my arguments were around thinking about a poly household,
Yes.
or kind of the relationship anarchy, and thinking about kind of chosen families. If there are multiple resource incomes,
Yep.
um, sharing responsibilities from a biological perspective, if your children are in this household, they're going to have stronger relationships in terms of attachment styles. They're going to have more opportunities in terms of access to resources. And, touch wood, it didn't happen. But if somebody in the family structure kind of passed away, there would be then more support to look after the child.
Yeah.
Um, so I argued, the benefits of, I think more so kind of polyamory, but like touched on open relationships for the idea of the importance of sex for different people, and healthy sex, and
Yeah.
people having sex that they enjoy. That actually
Yep.
maybe a relationship and a couple could focus more on the procreation and get recreational sex elsewhere. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I got good marks for it. But then what you spoke
Amazing.
about in terms of the science not catching up, I was still in evolutionary psychology and reading about myself, and my rationale for as a sexual minority existing was the
Oh
gay
no.
uncle hypothesis, was the idea that I
Sorry.
don't need to
Gotta be
pass stuff
sick.
on yet. And it was just like, oh, well, I mean, I am a gay uncle, but is there more to my existence from an evolutionary psych perspective than like helping raise my nieces and nephews? Yeah, it was. I have mixed feelings. I think a lot of Evo psych makes sense, and then a lot of it just doesn't in terms of like keeping up with, yeah, contemporary society, contemporary relationship understandings.
Yeah, it makes me sick. It makes me sick genuinely. I For the clinical psychology pathway in the United States, I'm not sure how it is in the UK because I know it's different in every country. You have to get your doctorate, which I did that part, but now I need to get a certain number of hours for my postdoc and then take an exam called the EPPP. It's a whole licensure exam. Anyhow, my one of my supervisors gave me this like huge deck of flashcards to study with. The listeners can't see it's bigger than my face. It's it's pretty sizable. And so I had a moment where I was like, okay, I'm gonna shuffle these cards and I'm gonna pull one out like a tarot deck, just as like an invitation to what I'm about to study for this stupid ass test. And the first card that I pulled out said, provide a evolutionary based perspective on gold diggers. That was my first card.
Wow.
To which I flipped to the back, and you know what it said? It said, women, first off, because apparently only women can be gold diggers. Let's just start with that first word. Like it's not like it could be like all genders, which is like, what the. Okay, so women have learned that they can sell their bodies and therefore get more access to privileges And it said also use the hedonic treadmill as a frame. And so it said women know they can sell their bodies to male partners to get more access to privilege and then get really used to that lifestyle and then want more and more pleasure. And that was the answer. And it made me sick. The fact that,
Mhm.
again, we're only talking about women and there's no level of structural conversation about capitalism and how women have been, kept away from access to fair labor and blah, blah. I just started crying. I was like, you're telling me I'm going to spend all these hours studying for this, where I'm going to get into a test room and I have to answer a question that I don't even fundamentally believe with the answer, but to get a license under this system, I got to keep playing this game. So then I started going through it and looking at all the different things around sexuality. And I pull out one card that's like, what is the current theories on queer relationships? And me as a queer person, I'm starting, fucking curious about what this card has to say. And it says, current research shows that most people explore different sort of queer dynamics and then come back to heterosexuality, and it's just an exploratory phase.
Wow.
I want to burn those cards. If I want to play the game and get my license, I gotta do it. But like, damn, like, how am I gonna answer that on an exam?
And I do, yeah, it's difficult going up against kind of such a huge, powerful monolith as kind of individual queer people. And it's why kind of there's so much power in queer families and queer unity. I absolutely kind of have that same mindset when I'm doing my teaching that when I'm teaching on sexual orientation development or pornography or digital technologies, all that kind of stuff, like, and as a kind of subtext, I teach at the University of Brighton, which has a very queer, liberal
Great.
university cohort because the city is kind of very queer and liberal.
Love that.
Um, so kind of whenever I kind of teach and look, these are the main articles on the topic or the main theories. Now let's actually apply them to or beyond a gender binary or a heteronormative kind of ideal. So yeah, kind of 9 times out of 10, it will be here's the slide, and now here's Liam's interpretation of it that is
Yeah.
needed. So I imagine when you're kind of doing those answers in an exam, it's well, this is what the answer says. I don't agree with it, but this is the card that you want me to remember in the rehearsed answer. It's yeah, it's crazy.
The listeners can't see my face. I'm just jaw dropped. Yeah, absolutely. My one of my mentors used to say that you gotta hail to Caesar and just get your union card and then get the hell out of that place. And I'm
Yeah.
like, got it. Yes, right, right. All queer relationships are just experimental. Got it. Check. Got that answer right. Here's my license so that I can help people get out of this paradigm. Like, fascinating, right? And so I'm so grateful that your younger self is already pushing the edge there, right? And I'm also grateful that your professor or whoever was grading that didn't take that as a moment to fail you. There are some
Mhm.
professors who would have absolutely been like, this is completely wrong. Like, I appreciate that they were able to take that moment and step back and say, it's maybe not right for me, but you have a sound argument here. Because
Yeah.
I remember one of my professors, she really specialized and was like a leader in EFT, emotion focus therapy. And she gave me this whole paradigm on couples work, couples work, couples work, couples work. And I said, what if we expanded this to polycules and other sorts of frameworks and a bit more expansive dynamics? And at the time, I'm a student, I'm sitting down, she's standing up leading this lecture. And she goes, well, you know what I've seen clinically is that never works. There's always one person who wants it and the other person who doesn't. And I was just dumbfounded at the time because I'm a non-monogamous polyamorous person myself in all of these relationships where we want it. I have my whole community, but here's a moment as a student with the power dynamic where
Mm.
it's like, do I speak to the power and the authority that's standing up in the room who's going to grade my paper that semester, you know what I mean? And so I did. I was like, you know what? That's not what I've seen in my own community and in my own life. And she was like, well, great, then you can write the book on it. And I was like, you know what? I fucking will. I fucking will. You know what? And so, but that's a moment where if I was a bit more demure, I could have been like, great, okay, Dr. Blah, blah, blah says that never works. I should give up all of my dissertation. I should give up all of this stuff and I should listen to the expert.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And what you were saying about like the when you what you were describing there reminds me of kind of the almost like dangerous stereotypes I've seen on social media in terms of 3 reasons why non-monogamy doesn't work, or
uh,
3 reasons
uh,
why polyamory is basically cheating.
uh,
Like it's these are dangerous. And actually, reflecting on your comment a little bit more about like the cue cards, for somebody like yourself thinking, I'm just going to get past the post and then think about how to implement change, there's going to be other people who will just take that information to heart. The
Yes.
other thing is you're questioning the cards that relate to queerness and relationships and sexuality, but and this isn't a critique of you, but you're then accepting the other cards that focus more on, well, this is how this therapeutic approach works, and this is what the research says in this area. And I wonder if people who are coming to kind of clinical therapeutic training, who potentially have experience of different clinical approaches, would accept the gender and queerness and sexuality cards, but then look at the other ones and critique them.
Hmm.
I think it's yeah, I suppose it broadly speaks to the importance of individual life approaches when we think about questioning everything. I
Totally.
view the world, I view the world through this kind of sexuality lens. Other
Hmm.
people will view it through more of an intersectional lens or whatever lens is kind of important to them and who they are.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Me search, right? You're passionate about the things that apply to you, and yeah, I mean, I want to burn all of it down. It's fascinating. I got into it, and I was like, this is all really problematic. Like even all of it. The fact that I had to pay hundreds. I have $500,000 in student loans to get this education. I'm a first generation student. This was the only way that I was going to get through that. My parents couldn't pay for that. So this is how I do this. Okay. So you're telling me I paid that amount of money to get this amount of training, which is about relational skills, mental health. Every single person on this world should have access to that. That is insane that I had to go to
Mhm.
that amount of money to get to be able to help people with things that we should all have the time and space and access to. But under capitalism, we don't. And so we create this weird, fucked up thing where we work for the rich and then people can pay me money to access me. Oh yeah, like the more I got into it, the more I'm like, oh, I want to burn this all down because, psychology in this field was created what 200 years ago. It's not that long.
Mhm.
What the hell did we do before all this? We had community, okay? We had community. And so, yes, my dream goals are to get back to a space where we could community hold one another and not have to isolate into these broken silos of individual therapists and these broken systems where if you are suicidal and you need to be hospitalized, here's $20,000 of debt for your hospital bill that could send,
Yeah.
yeah, I do want to burn it all. So all the flashcards, we can burn the whole deck. I do want to help people. I want to be clear. I want to help people expand, and I want people to have really good experiences in life. And I don't think that I personally don't believe you can be someone in this profession and be apolitical. I think that's
Mhm.
negligent.
Particularly when you're working with minoritized individuals who are so
Yeah,
impacted by politics. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
And I do similar things with my students. I remind them that this at university paying they are paying money. And again, kind of in an ideal world, we would have or more government funding to the higher education institutions, so the burden and the debt didn't fall on the student.
Yep.
But yeah, access to education should be free for all. I remind them that you're paying in the UK, it's about £9,000 a year. You need to ask questions. You need to challenge me in these spaces. You need to not just kind of sit back and listen to my information. Like this is it's so yeah, I never quite know how to get the message across to students
Mm,
just how important the university and college years can be for intellectual curiosity, for developing critical thinking, for having the opportunity to go back and forth. Today, like coincidentally, was the first time in one of my seminars after 4 or 5 weeks of teaching, where a student kind of came back at me and said a few things, and the rest of the class
yes.
like laughed. It was, I create a kind of inclusive environment, so it felt like banter, and I was like, brilliant. You're the first person to do this, and it led to just more conversations back and forth. Like we need this space to debate and deconstruct knowledge.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And so inviting, I mean, speaking about BDSM and power dynamics, it's a power dynamic, right? And I think that's an important thing that one of my professors, Dr. Braden Berkey, who had helped create the APA guidelines for working with kinky folks, he helped me to really see that like power dynamics are everywhere constantly all the time, right? And so it's always happening. And so even in that dynamic with student and teacher, there's a power dynamic there, right? And so becoming more aware to all of those power dynamics, I think does make you a better player in terms of creating containers and scenes or whatever word you want to say around that. The more you have consciousness to all of the ways there's power dynamics constantly ongoing in the world, the more awareness you have to the nitty-gritty finiteness of the power dynamic that you create in a actual container of a scene.
I think it kind of, yeah, for on a personal level, it goes kind of beyond that for me, that when
Mm,
I'm in in these kind of kink spaces, regardless of kind of the motivation behind it, whether it's social, whether I'm giving presentations, etc.
hmm.
Um, I'm aware that there's a power dynamic because I'm a researcher of these kink communities, that
Yeah.
I'm involved in podcasts and all these different stuff talking about
Right.
the academic psychological aspect of kink. So yeah, there've been several many times where I've just had kind of people, or one of the examples, I give regular talks as part of London Fetish Week, organised
Hmm.
by Recon,
Hmm.
the social media site for kinky men, more
Yep.
broadly speaking. And I give presentations each year, and I get people coming up at afterwards or at different points throughout the week. I have no idea why they're coming up to me, whether it's
Mm.
they want to be friendly, whether whatever. And constantly in my head, it's like, well, obviously they now know they're speaking to Dr. Liam Wignall. Doesn't matter what I do in terms of making them feel comfortable, etc. There's a power dynamic.
Yep.
And this is people who play with power dynamics. So I think it's potentially even more complex for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm curious. You must have, right? This is another moment where, we talked at the beginning. I got your consent to ask about your personal life, right? And so the tabula rasa, blank slate thing of the therapist, which I think is a reinforcement of privilege, and specifically often white, heteronormative. We can just throw the whole thing on it, privilege, because the more you align with the system, the more you can appear just blank. If you visibly do not align with that, you are outing yourself. If I have tattoos, if I cut my hair in a queer way, if I literally have hair out of my armpits right now, right? Like that is pretty like, hey, I'm a queer person, it's, and so like there's so many ways that you like out yourself. And I have had clients who are, I'm in Chicago, which is pretty big, but the more rural you get and you're a queer person, the more crossover there is in queer spaces. There's only so many queer spaces. If we're talking about queer and kinky, now there's really only so many play spaces. There are only so many dungeons. And so many
Mhm.
therapists are like, like tabula rasa, never say hi to the client outside. But what happens when you're like me and you're a queer therapist, a kinky queer therapist, and I'm at a play party and there's only so many of those in Chicago, and I get a client coming in for therapy and is like, I go to the same play space. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, there's no right or wrong answer.
Right,
And
of course, yeah.
actually, as you were kind of saying that, it made me, I'd not thought about this before, but kind of my own journey with
Mm-hmm.
um, identity and representation, that early on in the PhD journey, or kind of once I kind of got the doctorate and
Yeah.
was kind of giving academic talks, I always had the mindset that because I'm speaking about such minoritized, stigmatized communities, if people believed that I was an insider of any sort, there might be that assumption of like, oh, well, that's, it's that insider talk about the insider perspective. I thought actually it would be stronger and better for the communities I research to come at this as, look, I'm presenting this as an academic, as an unbiased person, and kind of having that shroud of science.
Mm-hmm.
And my position has totally changed now. That actually,
Mm,
I think there's some utility to that. That I need to show that what I'm doing is scientific in the terms
right,
of
right,
the
right.
research, but there also needs to be authenticity for thinking about, why is this person doing this research? Why should we, listen to this person? And then on the flip side, when I'm presenting to kink communities, I want them to know, again, kind of this is an authentic voice conducting research and having kinksters' best interests at heart.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And then often people trust you more, right? Because
Yeah.
they know that you've walked this, and that you're not hiding from that, you're naming it, which puts the power dynamic right there so you can have a conversation about it, right? I know many of the listeners on this podcast are also therapists, and so like you said, there's no right or wrong way to answer that. I think each person is going to have a different felt sense of what they're comfortable with.
Mhm.
From to answer it too, in terms of what I do, for anyone who's like listening and very curious, one of my couples therapists, she came in and first session was like, hey, I'm also in these spaces, and you might see me there. I'd be willing to talk to you about that. And if there's a day where you really want to go to that space and you feel like you cannot because I'm there, I'm willing to have that conversation with you and like abandon that space so that you can have access to it, which I thought was a really beautiful way. And my professor, Dr. Berkey, again, had always said that like it's essentially a question of acculturation, of like how deeply acculturated is this person to this dynamic? Is this the first time that they've ever been to a dungeon and they're seeing you mid scene? Because again, I can't control if I'm mid scene and a client walks in. But if this is their first time doing that, that's a huge
Mhm.
drop compared to like a, 60-year-old Kingster who's been in the scene for 30 years, seen many people on the cross, whatever. Oh, my therapist is here. Oh, okay. That's like seeing your therapist at the grocery store for them in some ways, right? And
Mhm.
so that level of deeper reflection of acculturation. Now, what I think is fascinating is in my internship year, I was doing community mental health in Indiana, which for context, I don't know how much you know about the states. Indiana is very conservative, very conservative. And I was in a room with many psychiatrists who had never had any sort of lesson on psychology and how this, and they're learning how to do therapy. And so they were talking about their own discomfort of if a client saw them drunk outside, yada, yada, yada. What is it like for a client to see them drunk? And they're like, like I wouldn't want that, but also it's human and all that sort of stuff. And I had brought in, I was like, well, and again, the more marginalized your identities are and the more smaller those communities are. Like for me as a queer, kinky person, there's only so many dungeons in Chicago. And there's a real reality that I can run into clients there. And that's something clinically I need to be prepared for. Now, get this, I have that lecture with them where I'm teaching. Next week, I come in, the first topic that they all say to me, hey, Nicole, we were really uncomfortable that you brought in content about your own sex life, and we feel deeply uncomfortable that you talked about that in this space.
Wow.
I was shook. I was like, I mean, professionally, this is something I feel like, what, But that was a big moment for me where I was like, okay, right, this is the comfort level of the temperature of what I'm in. Like, I think clinically they need to confront that. That's in a real reality, but there's still just so much professionalism. And depending on where you're at, like, I can actively get told that I'm doing something wrong, right, by having that conversation by them, even though clinically that is something that I need to be prepared for. And all of my kinky therapists who are listening right now in this podcast episode, like that is something you actively have to be prepared for in your small communities, right? And so it's
Mhm.
just it's more of like the flashcard moment, right, where like there's a specific way to do this thing in the professional way and you got to button up and do it that way. And the more marginalized you get in identities, the more you have to change that system and risk these moments where people look at you and are like, we're uncomfortable that you had that conversation. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't come back on that. Yeah, that's shit. I think it is about the stigma attached to kink,
Mm-hmm.
um, and this kind of misunderstanding of actually the importance of BDSM and kink to people's identities. That
Yeah.
one of the things I tried to kind of document to talk about in my research is that kink is an orientation. That for some people it's completely sexual, for some it's about the behavioral, physiological things. For others, it's about identity and community, and the way that kind of I get my students or non academics who do research not into sex and kink and BDSM, etc., is by having those comparisons. That actually, if I was to tell you about the gym, like the gym, going to the gym is one of my interests. It's what I spend
Mm,
hours and hours doing. It's a big part of who I am. It's important that, I don't need to tell people, but it's important that if it comes up in conversation or if actually people ask about like, oh, how do you unwind, etc., I want to feel comfortable enough to talk about that stuff. And yeah, BDSM is just not there yet in terms of people, realizing that, oh, I don't need to know about your intricate details about how you engage in it, but just like, yeah, this is one of the things that's important to me. That's not
yeah.
a sexual conversation. That is just yeah, here are my leisure pursuits or
Right.
leisure.
Right. Absolutely. And so it's almost like the stigma around sexuality just in general, to name any sort of sexuality, pleasure, and then kink and BDSM even gets this higher level of stigma because it's even more forbidden, right? If I were to be, thank God I'm not in this anymore, and this is how I get to have this voice because this isn't my community, but if I was in a 9 to 5 button up job and someone asked me, hey, what did you do this weekend? I can't tell them that I went to this queer play party and had this amazing rope scene with my femme partner where we like, like that was a huge part of what my weekend was. It was amazing, you know what I mean? But I can't say that because, but if I were to say, oh, like I had this great amazing meal and a dinner, that's okay. Both of those are pleasures, right? Both of those are
Hmm.
embodied somatic pleasures, but one of them is absolutely forbidden. And like the added addition of rope, right? Freaking people even more out. Now you're talking about restriction, right? Like those are things that would be sent, I'd be sent to HR and kicked out of that company real fast, right? In a very button up space. And so it says a lot. It says a lot about what sort of pleasures are okay and what sort of pleasures are absolutely forbidden and not okay to talk about.
And this is beyond the scope of a 90-minute podcast, or certainly, beyond the scope of me. But yeah, like pleasure, sexual pleasure has long been um, chastised, governed, controlled for multiple different reasons. Like that, yeah, there's entire books on it. I think of Julie Peakman's book, The Pleasure's All Mine,
Oh, I haven't
which
heard that one.
different chapters of different components of sexuality. There's a book, I think it's 4,000 Years of Desire. Again, kind of just, it's been so long since I've read it, but just great arguments documenting how, kind of through the ages, sex was one of the ways that people were controlled,
Mm,
where sex was used as a tool to make people into villains, like a bunch of different ways. The sex has been, yeah, employed as a tool.
mm, mm. Yeah, and there are other cultures where sex has been deeply revered and a part of the spirituality. And there are also many cultures that have been burned and texts that have been burned. So I'd be curious, like truly in the historical lineage, how
Mhm.
many more there really were that based on the genocide of Christianity that really globalized and colonized the world. Like, like how many more texts would we really have? But there are certain spiritual traditions where sexuality is actually a deep part of the
Mhm.
spirituality. And so this is where, I mean, all of this is political, but really coming back even then to the politics of the genocide of Christian thought and the way that that colonized the world and created this reality where, again, yeah, the 9 to 5, like that is all of the trickle down of that. And so it's really fascinating when you're like awakening to that insight truly, which is realizing how deep the systems have impacted us. And then when you're awakening that into your own subconscious, where you're like, oh shit, the things I
Mhm.
like and the things I don't like, the things that make me uncomfortable, the things that turn me on, all of that is deeply impacted by the years and years and years of all of those cultural systems. That's a fucking wake up. That's a daily one that I do every day of my life. And I know I'll die to the end still being like, wow, didn't see how deep that one went over here. Jeez, okay. It's like it is an awakening process to realize that and get critical about that and also embrace your desires and not always be, questioning yourself, but still having a bit of curiosity and critical engagement with your sexuality. I think it is essential that we have critical engagement with these things.
Mhm. And I think there's a difference between recognizing how deeply ingrained some of these things are, the need to think critically, but actually there's a step on we're not always told how to act on that, or how can we start to come to terms with those different things? And you can't. It's going to take hundreds of years and fundamental shifts in attitudes before we can forgive ourselves.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I'm curious how do you see that process unfolding? The first thing that comes to mind for myself is community and the importance of rupture and repair and growing together in community and transformative justice and not just throwing people away when we have a mistake, right? All that sort of stuff. And for you, like how do you see that growth process for folks as we awaken to the insight of needing to be critical about our sexuality?
I think it's exactly the same. And I think about, as in, I think it's community. I think it's finding support networks and people who can see you for who you are and allow you to explore different aspects of yourself that, this is absolutely still things I'm doing in my relationships now of a space, a community, a social network that allows me to make mistakes and explore myself in ways and think about who I am, my relationship with myself, and how that then impacts with other people. I think is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Going kind of beyond, you know, say me and my social circle, you have examples throughout history where queer communities have come together in times of need, in times of crisis. I would argue that it's a shame that it needs a crisis for that community to come together, and I wish it was a bit more
Right.
integral and to the forefront.
Yeah.
Um, Same for BDSM communities. I think of the fires of San Francisco that Gail Rubin speaks about in their research. What Rubin speaks about is how the the Leathermen and the Kingsters of San Francisco were the people who really came to the forefront and helped the community at the time. I think it is just I agree with you that I think how we change and find spaces to be authentic and explore critically who we are, including our sexuality, is having a comfortable environment and community.
Mm-hmm.
How communities develop, I think, is a completely different question, and I don't have an immediate answer for that. Some of them are
Right.
going to be grassroots and just authentically finding people who are like-minded, who share your interests, who share your identities. I'm all for kind of digging on the internet and technology as being awful in some respects, but one of the things it was super useful for and powerful for was allowing for that connectivity beyond geographical boundaries. That the person who might be your soulmate in terms of just like your thinking and the connection that you may have could be on the other side of the world. Um,
Right.
so I think technology is going to still play a pivotal role in helping these communities develop, but I think we would need to kind of have technology as a tool for communication and connection and then move it offline.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because rupture and repair is hard to go through online, right? So much of communication is in the nonverbals. And so when you're having that with just text alone, it's hard. And granted, we can still get into, like you and I are on a call right now, we can see each other, right? And so
Hmm.
there is benefit in that compared to just the written word. But even now, if you and I were to go into a rupture, it'd be nice to have a moment where we could hug afterwards and have a bit of somatic grounding together, right? And so there are limitations to online cultures in the levels of, human experience you can go through with rupture and repair and community building and all of that. And also, it is huge. This is playing a huge role. As you said, we can talk shit about the internet all we want, but like it's playing a huge role in our liberation right now. Think about this before when you had that. Now, quote unquote, I'm not going to say it's weird, but you're thinking to yourself back in the day, like, I have this weird kink that no one knows about. How the fuck would you find out? Right? Word of mouth, someone maybe drops it. You see leather, right? Here we go. You see
Hmm.
leather, right? So all these sort of code switching, but that is so hard to do. Nowadays, you can just type into a search, blah, 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 blah. Oh, wow, there's this whole Reddit community. There's all this. Oh, wow, there's that event you were speaking at, right? Like you can tap into networks so
Hmm.
much faster, which also eliminates some of the shame. And I've spoken with previous educators in the space specifically about the edge between this, where it's like, yes, it gives us more access to the community, and that can also be dangerous in the sense that some people will learn the lingo of the community, but maybe weren't going through the community building to learn the
Hmm.
skills of how to do rupture and repair. Like the dom who learns, it can be any part, but let's say like a dom who learns all of the lingo of safe words, blah 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 blah, but has never like actually practiced all of any of that, but has gone on enough online communities to know the words to say to signal to someone like a sub, like, hey, I'm experienced, right? And then these horrible things happen because there wasn't the sort of vetting that used to happen through word of mouth. So like we're in an
Hmm.
interesting time where like I love the lack of shame and the openness and the connection that internet is bringing, and also it's a time to be critical about like how deep is this person in the community? Do they just know the lingo, and are they sort of like value fronting to pull you in when they actually don't have community where they've gone through a lot of this learning? And that's a risk for sure.
And I know we kind of went off on a complete tangent of it, but in terms of the journey into kind of this research area, it
Mm-hmm.
was those sorts of things that I was thinking about at the same
Mm.
time as doing that evolutionary psychology essay, that I was
Yeah.
thinking about how useful the internet was for allowing people to find people like them. The research I was doing at the time was only talking about sexual minorities in general, or kind of, specifically kind of gay, lesbian, bisexual people at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of simultaneously reading research on kink, and the internet just wasn't mentioned. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't going to be happening in a vacuum. If it's
Right.
happening for one community or one minoritized group of people, it's going to have impacts for others.
Amazing. Yep.
So that was basically my research journey, that I started
Great.
looking at the internet's impact on kink, and everything you said is basically the stuff that I tackled in the interviews. That
Mm-hmm.
um like one of the key things I argued, and others have done it as well, but in my PhD research and in the book, is just how integral the internet has been for helping people find people like them, not feel like they are the only person in the world. And some of the interviews I did with participants were so powerful that, like, not a direct quote, but one participant was describing how they didn't want to feel alone, and by connecting with other people online, and it wasn't what we would kind of class as niche kinks. It was,
Mm-hmm.
something like bondage or something, but just
Mm-hmm.
being like, I thought it was just me, and having that
Mm.
opportunity to feel that connection, feel
Yeah.
that
Huge.
all. There's a range of kind of social psych research into the importance of identity construction and how we need to feel safe and confident and secure. And
Yep.
if we know that there's aspects of ourselves that other people share, and we view those people in a good light, it makes us feel better about ourselves.
Yep.
On the flip side, the main danger I came up with, or the main danger I spoke about, was people bypassing the traditional, in air quotes, traditional ways of engaging in kink. That it used to be you would earn your leathers, you would
Right.
kind of build that reputation. You couldn't wear a particular thing until A, B, and C in your community had,
Yeah.
sometimes signed off officially. Other times it was, there was a ritualized enjoyment aspect of it. Whereas, it's two things now that have changed. There's number one, the internet, in terms of getting the lingo, in terms of
Yep.
developing a reputation in other ways. So on various kink platforms, you can have friends, you can have recommendations from other people. They don't signify anything. They don't signify safety, knowledge, experience. You on FetLife, you can tag all the different things that you're into. On other platforms, you can have a bunch of different pictures of gear and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Doesn't mean. And then the other kind of main thing that has impacted it, which impacts most things negatively, is capitalism.
Mm, yeah.
That the
Yep.
minute people have the money to purchase gear, if you see somebody in a play space and they're in full leathers, or they've got that very particular niche brand of things, you're going to look at them more favorably,
Yep.
just because they could afford to go into fall into a kink shop and just say, I'll take it.
Yep.
That there was something about the underground nature and the recommendations of
Yep.
how you get involved with certain people, or how you get access to different forms of gear and equipment, etc. And it has led to kind of horror stories, sadly, of people not. Well, I won't go into too many specifics, but it's led to horror stories.
Yeah. Absolutely. 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 My latex wear is expensive. It is very expensive. I love it. It is expensive, right? And so there's capitalism at the heart of this too. And I think for me, one of the things that was coming to mind, which as people in the kink community, we know how problematic this is, but think about the scale of 50 Shades of Grey. Like, just think
Mm.
about the scale of how many people bought that book, how many people have seen all three of the movies. And granted, me and my polycule were watching that movie this weekend as we did the rove scene, which was like interesting, like sort of we would all just like laugh at every 5 moments and be like, that is so problematic together. And so it was like a
Hmm.
comedy moment for us. But there were so many people. It was great. It was great. I loved being tied and like watching and just being like, this is crazy. Um
I love the idea of thinking about 50 Shades of Grey as a comedy. That
it
is
was.
excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, you're like, is many people watch and then go, wow, this whole world, I could do that. Why don't I do
Hmm.
that? Right. And they don't have that same lens. And so as you're saying, community is such an essential piece, essentially for like the ability to grow and checked and be checked and called in. That's an essential part of
Yeah.
community, as you're saying, that we're lacking around this. And so finding our feet in this as we're building safely. There's the Kink and Leather Archives in Chicago. It's a museum. I don't know if you've been.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
I've not
beautiful.
been, but I've heard wonderful things.
Well, let me know when you come out. We'll go together.
Sounds good.
This museum, they had these. They have the paper notes of where they would post these listings, like Dom seeking experience, blah 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 blah, and these different networks. And so it was beautiful. You could see the responses to different threads and where people would respond and leave a phone number and how they would get into contact. And it was really beautiful to see. You might really enjoy this, like see some of the
Mm.
written notes of how people connected before the internet. And it was also really interesting. I remember reading a plaque that had talked about how if the community leaders who had those boards and were vetting that, if you had had a bad experience with someone, you could write into them and they would remove you from the community immediately. It wasn't like a moment where you got an opportunity to have a conversation about it and kind of like present your case and, all that sort of stuff. You just got dropped immediately. And so it's interesting to think about how that creates a culture where ideally the person who would make the complaint would really hold that with a lot of care, that if I make this complaint to the community leaders, this person is gone. And you would
Hmm.
hope that that also keeps the other player like accountable, like wow, at any point someone could make this. But you can see the complexities of that now, like how do we get into systems where people are held accountable, and also what does it mean to hold space for transformative justice under these systems, because the impact of all these systems is wide, and there's a dance between taking accountability for your part of this system that's internalized, and also acknowledging that you didn't start this problem, right? This is a dynamic relationship with all the systems, as we noted. And so I think it's really interesting to think about vetting, right, and community standards both pre-internet and with the internet now.
I think some of that kind of community vetting is still there in terms of the
Yeah.
events that I go to and what I present at and the community links that I have. Like I'm aware of the gossip that happens within, and potentially calling it gossip is kind of underplaying what it is, but I'm aware of like
Right.
things that go on within the community and some of the kind of community pushback that you can see people's profiles on different platforms become a bit more reduced, or they become a bit more a bit less active on social media, and think about, okay, well, they've got to reconsider how they engage with it. So I think those community dynamics and the ways that we think about reputation and consequence of behaviors are still there. But that is for kind of rewind. In my
Mm-hmm.
research in the book, I identified community versus non-community members. And the
Mm,
community members are people who often attend events, will have online profiles and have a lot of information, have friendship networks, and kind of a blaring of their kink and normal, in air quotes, identity on their profiles. And then you have the non-community members who are on these sites functionally for sex, for
mm-hmm.
BDSM, that
Mm-hmm.
there's different examples of how they engage with it, that they will create a profile, message somebody, have kinky sex, and then delete the profile,
Yeah.
or will have minimal information, will go on it once every 6 months, or will be on particular websites but not attending community events. Or if they do, they're only ever in the dark room and they're not going to Bondage
Mm-hmm.
101 or Consent 101.
Right.
So you've got kind of broadly these two groups of, for people, they see kink as a social and a sexual aspect of their lives, and for the other people it's just completely sexual and they don't feel that kind of same need.
Yeah.
For those non-community people, that's where potential concerns arise in terms of where are they learning the knowledge about how to engage in kink in a, I was about to say safe, sane, and consensual way, but no, in a risk-aware way. In,
Right.
the mantra that I follow is, or I'm aware of and praise the 4 C's, which is caring, caution, communication, and consent. Where
Mm-hmm.
do they learn those kind of terms and that ways of practicing kink? They don't. And then where do they find out about the community justice of, oh, this person has broken safe words or has, done not very nice things?
Right.
They don't learn about that level of reputational damage, of accountability, etc. So again, there's pros and cons to A, the internet, and B, how kink community and subcultures operate today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Which makes me want to deep dive into the word gossip when you started all of that. Where I know there's no magical answer for this, but boy, do I want that magical answer. With that context of what you just said, where is the line between gossip and community safety? And particularly about something like sexuality, which is not always BDSM, but if we're mixing all of that into this, where is that line of gossip and oversharing details that
Mm.
maybe you don't have consent for versus, hey, this person was unsafe in this way. And so I'm going to cross those boundaries of consent where they did not want to tell me because I'm genuinely concerned for the safety of other individuals who are non community members who are doing this. Like, oh, I wish there was some magical God that could tell me in those moments when you're with community, like, yes, Nicole, great answer. You totally tell people versus no. And the reality of ethics is it's always gray and it's always nuanced. And I hate that, that the part of me that wants to be right hates that. But I'm curious for you, like, how do you end up defining that difference between gossip and community care?
I am a unique entity given my role as the academic
Mm,
kink researcher.
yep.
Ethics and consent are kind of at the forefront of everything I do.
Yeah.
That there are moments where people who I've interviewed as part of my research are in the room and I'm talking about, or I'm using data that they've given me. I'm using quotes and all anonymous,
Sure.
but I do that looking around the room, not looking at anyone in particular or that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So I've been in kind of those interesting situations, and
Mm-hmm.
similar things have been, oh, I've read one of your papers. Is this the participant you interviewed? But I
Yep.
can't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've read them. It's fine. But
Mm-hmm.
that's I can't go and ask them.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think I'm a bit more unique. I
Mm-hmm.
I would just think that there are differences between seeking information that is relevant to decisions you want to make and information that isn't needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so perfectly acceptable to look at people's online profiles, you're speaking to them, and then you find out, or you look at their friend list and, oh, I know that person. I think a good technique, and one of the things my participants spoke about, they will then email the people they know and say, oh, we both got a connection with person A. They're on your friend list. Have you played with them? Do you,
Yeah.
A, is it worth my time? Are they a catfish? Because that's often one of the things that we have to think about in online environments. B, have you played with them?
Yep.
Was it a good experience?
Yep.
And I think that isn't, did you enjoy yourself? Because actually there are experiences where we might not have enjoyed ourselves, but it's nothing to do with the individual people. It's the chemistry wasn't right or
Right.
the
Right.
headspace was not there. So I think gleaning information about people and about, whether you should engage in risky activities or vulnerable activities or whatever with them is a perfect line of questioning. Questions around how big is different body sizes,
Yeah.
what are their interests, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a difference between, let's say you are only involved in bondage, you're just rigor through and through. It potentially skips a few steps. If, oh, I see that person over there. Do you know them? Yeah, they're not into bondage. They hate it. Okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up. You've
Right.
you've saved both our time. You've
Sure.
potentially avoided awkwardness, but that only works in a conversational, friendly approach. So yeah, there's, as you say, kind of there's no binary answer of like this is the way to do it or this isn't. It depends on the
Right.
situation. But I think broadly speaking, will the information inform whether you will play with that person or not? And would you feel comfortable other people sharing that information about you? I think is a good way of framing it.
That's tough though, because I have a lot of stuff I'd be totally cool with people sharing, and then some, and then so I think that makes me think about the acculturation of people's comfort level with sexuality,
Hmm.
because for me, I'm on the 1% of the 1%, like you who studies this, and I was like totally cool, yeah, like go for it, like share that, that's fine, and so whoever's tuning in to be like, you're not alone in figuring out this. I think this is what it means to be exploring new areas of relationality, right? In terms of, I can even get into you with some of this, like my polycule network is navigating how much to disclose around STI status. So, like, one of my partners is exploring with someone who has a positive HSV1 diagnosis, right? And so that introduces risk into the system. Granted, there's so many people that have HSV1. It's very common. I'm sure you know that for the listener. It's very common. Most of us have it. This person has had an outbreak before, right? Which means that there's more chance of spreading the virus than people who have never had an outbreak. I did a lot of research on this after that. And so then my partner got tested, and this is even just with oral sex, which there's risk of even just any sort of contact, even if you're using a condom, the risk of even the genital area just being contacted from the labia, from the scrotum, the whole thing. It's possible, right? And so now we're talking about percentages. He tested positive for HSV1 but never had an outbreak. He's one of the normal, like, asymptomatic carriers. So now I'm sitting here thinking, how much do I disclose? I do not fluid bond with him in the sense of we use condoms, right? But for oral sex, we do fluid bond. So I don't fluid bond in a term of penetration. How much do I need to disclose to my fluid bonding partner about this risk? Because it's small, but it's still real, right? And then when I disclose that risk, my partner is only having sex with one other person. It's a small community. So the second I say, hey, other partner, I'm fluid bonding, my other partner over there is having sex with someone who has a positive STI status, that outs who that person is really fast without their consent. Because there's only like, if you know who my different people are and you know who that other person is, that now, so you see the layers of like, and then how often do I have to, like, do I need to say, hey, he's having sex with this person this many times a week, blah, 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 so that they can know the real risk. Because if it's once a year, that's less than like, do you see my mind just like shattering here at like, how do you do this consensually in ways that are authentic to all of the risk, which we shitty research on? First off, we can't isolate the variable of oral sex. So many people have genital and oral sex. So dear listener, like it's really hard to get research on what the actual risk is for that. So we're already playing with like a deep unknown. But in that deep unknown, like how much do you disclose? And it starts outing people.
I imagine it's going to be a personal, individualistic approach in terms of how to deal with it, because options that come to my mind is just like, initially I would just be like, it's full open communication. Like that's the whole point of how consensual non-monogamy works, is chatting about everything. And it's certainly one of the integral aspects in my own life. It's clear, transparent.
Yep.
If people get hurt, they get hurt. If people feel a particular kind of way, we talk about it. But then actually there might be other options where having all four people in the room to discuss, like, okay, I want to clear the air, I want to chat about this, so we are all informed and about the risks that are being undertaken, even if they are small percentages. It's important that everybody knows. There's also then different steps of like, hypothetically, I want to sit you down and tell you, like, if this happened, what information would you want to know? If this happened, what information would you want to know? And then the final thing is, like, if somebody works something out based on the information you've given them, that's, I don't know, it's potentially a way of easing your own blame around it, that you didn't disclose anything, you disclosed the important pieces of information. Right. And then what people have done with that in terms of like making the next steps, that is somewhat out of your control. But you thought to yourself, this is the information that is important to me to disclose to others. Sometimes there's kind of no getting around it.
Totally. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm just sitting in it all, really. And I think it's essential to have these conversations because there are so many people that are moving through this, and we don't have that worksheet. Like, you've got a worksheet on that flow chart, which maybe I'll make after this conversation of like, like, because that's what I want. It's like, okay, if this, then that, if this, then that. And I really do love that image of like a kitchen table poly dynamic where we all come together and have a conversation about the risk and the safety, and do it in a way where we're all sitting in a circle and being like, this is what we've got. And I think, as we're saying about community, I would imagine that pulls people together to be really intentional, because you're right. If you have this risky moment, you are inducing it into a system of people, and can then pass that risk into a system of people. Now, my thoughts are, again, I just went to that queer play party. If I'm having a pickup scene with somebody and they ask me about my STI status, do I have to then say I have these partners, they have the, like
Hmm.
how long is
Hmm.
kitchen table dynamic? Cool. Ongoing partners, got that. Like, yeah, let's have that moment where we all come together. You're at a pickup party doing play, like how long is that conversation, and maybe that is the right route to go. It really gives, like when you have a surgery, they give you that 0.02% of your LASIK surgery that you could go
Hmm.
blind. And that's the ethics of it. You sign that document, you say, I know that that's that small percentage, that if all things failed right now, And so it's just like, wow, like I just really, I'm passionate about helping people figure this out. And man, I really wish we had like some really great like flow charts for this to be able to like rest my ethics soul right now of like, what is the best way to do this? Uh,
There's something about, once we have information about risk and different variables,
uh,
etc., that's where it suddenly becomes like a sticking point. So,
yeah.
you know, in for your example, the minute you know that there is a potential source of something, that's when it's like actually we have this moral obligation to talk about it. But, part of that conversation can just be, the risk is small and this is a risk that we are aware of where we are comfortable navigating. It's not the best in the world, but this risk is potentially lower than the pickup parties, than just like the random casual encounters. So yeah, drawing those comparisons and saying, look, if this happens, blah, 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 but actually there's bigger risks of A, B, and C in these other spaces. And I think at the end of the day, the thing that you're discussing is being mindful about the people that you engage with, and
Yep.
that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And doing the emotional work for the person who maybe has never even heard of HSV1 and then goes, an STI about oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, right? And now we're doing community work with one another to be like, hey, this is a very normal thing. These other like that's a lot of community work that you're doing together. And I just as I was processing this with my partner as we were exploring it all together, it's like shit, like you go through all of these conversations, all of this, I'm looking at the ethics, the risks, and now you tell me that I'm supposed to just go into oral sex the next time and be super excited. Like I
Mhm.
just, there's so much more consciousness. Back in the day, it'd be like oral sex, woo, now you're like, wow, okay, like the risk, the ratios, the people I'm connected to. And it's like, talk about like trying to get out of your head and actually just enjoy the like moment of receiving head, right? Like there was so much going on in my head now about the ethics of it all. And so it's like interesting how the more aware you are, I'm not going to say the less fun you have and the more, sadness that comes. However, it's just you're holding much more consciousness, which means there's much more to
Mhm.
surrender into the moment to, the more you become aware of sexuality. And it's not just this like thing that you tap into occasionally. The more you really, I'm sure you've experienced this as a researcher, like the more you really commit to it, the more there is going on psychologically in your head every time that you have any sort of play. And it's like, time to turn that off and just be present with the sensation. That's a lot.
And it's one of the main things that people in my research have spoken about in terms of the benefits of kink and achieving
Mm,
that subspace, non-space.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Turn off the mind. That's where I love a good bondage, right? It's like truly like put the ball gag, restrict me, I will let go. Like I can't
Mhm.
speak anymore, like I will let go. What an amazing conversation.
I mean, it certainly went down different pathways.
That's the beauty of it all, right? That's the beauty of trusting the unfolding. And before we come towards a close and all that stuff, I want to make sure I take a deep breath with you. And I want to check in and see if there is anything else that you want to share with the listeners.
I feel like I've shared a lot throughout the last 90 minutes. No, I just, it is very useful to check in with people who have similar thinking as you and actually take a step
Yeah.
back. Like sex is brilliant, relationships are wonderful. Actually, as we said earlier, like it is important to critically reflect on them and think, and check in with yourself. And part of what I think these conversations do, and I've done other podcasts and the talks I do and wherever, is kind of thinking about my own accountability and my own what is the research I'm doing? How is it going to inform different perspectives, and how can it be used to, you know, impact the people I'm working with? So yeah,
Hmm.
it has been a great conversation. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, it's such a joy. It's such a joy. I record with so many different people, and when there are values that align and experiences, identity factors that align, the depth of conversation that you can go to, right? Like,
Hmm.
I love those moments where you and I are like really going deep into it. I'm not having that moment where I have to explain what the BDSMs,
Hmm.
like, so you're just like the different variations of how deep you can go in connection with people. And so I love those moments where there's someone who gets it and I can really just like,
Hmm.
let's go full into this and like really into it. And so it's such a joy to be able to like process the unknowns with you, right? Not the simple like here's the ABCD of how to have a great sex
Hmm.
life or whatever the fuck some people do. Like to really like sit with you and the like there's no answer for this. Want to talk about it? Like
Yeah.
that's very real and very human. And so I'm grateful for the nomination that came from another guest to be able to talk to you and to like continue that community conversation with these deep unknowns.
Yeah. It was a journey. Yeah. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
absolutely. All right. So, the one last question that I ask everyone on the show is what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Mm, God, there's several things that come to mind. I think the two in my head, because there's kind of a pessimistic one of like, we aren't as unique as we think we are. And I mean
Mm,
that we have more that connect us than separate us.
beautiful.
Um, but I think kind of more so on this topic, and I suppose related, there are people who will get you. There are people who will understand you. It takes more time for some than others, but once you achieve that, it is worth it.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And as you said, the internet, look at us using the internet to connect right now, right? So like,
Yeah,
yeah, great, and
yeah.
so many of my clients, I have clients who reach out to work with me from rural areas and they're like, Dr. Nicole, like, how do I find people, right? And that is often where we
Mhm.
are getting on the internet to find events, to find munches, to find this or that, or people or apps or whatever. And it's serious work. And I know so much of people trying to trust in the abundance of the people that are out there that you can connect with. And I really love this podcast as a testament to that. Like, you can see all these 200 plus episodes that have come of people who are similar. Like, it's there. And then
Mhm.
also that real reality that the more marginalized you are, the more you're in rural areas, there's a real scarcity to that. And so, like, holding that reality and what I hope out of that is, as we've spoken to, is there'll be more community care, right? In
Mhm.
a society that's so quick to just toss anything, toss anything. Oh, it's got a broken thing, we'll toss it. I don't need to repair that. I'll just buy a new one off of blah, 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 whatever. Like, I would hope that like so much of the queer lineage has been like really caring and coming together and going through the hard stuff. And so I hope that as we're continuing to expand, we can slow down and really be with the people that are around us to really go through those moments of rupture, which are inevitable in any human relationship,
Mhm.
and to grow together through that. That's my hope for humanity with all of this.
And that's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what an amazing episode. I'm so grateful that you took up the call to come onto the show. Thank
Thank you so
you.
much for the invite. Yeah,
Yes.
it was a wonderful conversation, and a breath of fresh air compared to some of the stuffier academic conversations I'm used to.
Yeah, man, I'm using the academic card to like really dismantle that. So I'm glad you feel that and it feels good.
Yeah, yeah, no, I get that.
Well, for all the listeners who really want to connect with you and have fallen in love with your perspective, your mind, your work, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram. I suppose Blue Sky is kind of the best way in terms of like the more academic perspective type thing, just at Liam
Mhm.
Wignall. And then on Instagram is just a way of connecting, but it's mostly just me posting pictures of food and
Yeah.
landscapes and whatever. But yeah, if you Google my name, there's various kind of blogs and podcasts and other different things I've done because I think it's so important to kind of have that community accountability.
Absolutely. I'll have all of that linked in the show notes below so the listeners can come and find you and just go straight into the notes and connect. So thank you again, Liam, for coming on to the show. It was such a joy to have you today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. Cheers.
Dear listener, thank you so much for tuning in to Modern Anarchy. Thank you for sharing this episode with your friends, with your lovers, with your community. Truly, it means so much to me, and I am so grateful that you are here. If you are wanting to release jealousy in your non-monogamous dynamics and step into compersion and pleasure-filled connection, you can read my book, The Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, for free on my website. There you will also find so many other free resources, including worksheets on how to clearly communicate and set commitments and boundaries within your non-monogamous dynamics, and other ways to practice clear communication about your sexual desires so that you can step into your most pleasure-filled sex and relationships. So head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to find all of those free resources, and I look forward to seeing you next week.